As Vanessa stood in my office, her voice shook with desperation as she begged for financial help. "Ryan, they're your kids too. Don't they deserve your support?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone cool and my expression distant. "The trust funds I set up for them are secure, Vanessa. Neither you nor Scott can touch them. You've already taken more than enough." Her face went pale as the weight of my words sank in. The control she once had over me was gone, replaced by the resolve of a man who had built something unshakable and refused to be a pawn ever again. But before I take you through the entire story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy tales like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss what's coming next. Milbrook was the kind of town where life followed its own rhythm, slow and steady. Tucked away among rolling hills and dotted with charming Victorian houses, the streets were lined with cozy cafes and a single bookstore that doubled as the town's heart. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, a signature of its idyllic charm. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches, kids played under sprawling oak trees, and families came together for Friday night football games at the local high school. Ryan Underhood, a 42-year-old software developer, was the picture of reliability, much like the town itself. His wire-rimmed glasses and the gray streaking his temples gave him an air of wisdom, while his calm demeanor masked a razor-sharp mind. He cherished his wife, Vanessa, a compassionate pediatrician, and doted on their 3 kids, Liam, Lily, and Noah. From the outside, their life seemed ideal, family dinners filled with warmth, weekends echoing with laughter, and a home brimming with love and shared moments. One late evening, Ryan sat in his home office, the steady clicking of his keyboard blending with the low hum of his monitors. The clock on his desk glowed 11:47 p.m. Among the clutter were small tokens of his life, a coffee-stained "World's Best Dad" mug and a framed photo of his beaming family. Then he heard it, Vanessa's laughter drifting in from the garden, followed by words that shattered his world. "Can you believe he still doesn't have a clue?" For a second, Ryan's breath caught in his throat. Those words hit like a sledgehammer, shattering the comforting stillness of his night. His hands froze on the keyboard as her voice echoed in his mind. "Can you believe he still doesn't have a clue?" Disbelief gripped him, surging like a tidal wave and battering the foundations of trust he had built over the past 15 years. The gentle hum of his workspace turned eerie, every sound around him amplifying the emptiness he suddenly felt. Memories that had once brought joy and reassurance now carried a sinister undertone, Liam's twinkling eyes, which had never quite mirrored his own, Lily's auburn locks, so unlike either his or Vanessa's, Noah's uncanny knack for numbers, a trait he had always thought came from him, now felt misplaced, almost mocking. Piece by piece, the story of his family began to unravel in his mind, each fragment a fresh wound. And then there was Scott Cummins. The name alone sent a heavy ache through Ryan's chest. Images of Scott flooded his memory, holding Noah at his baptism, giving his mother investment advice, standing beside him as best man at his wedding. How many times had Ryan clinked glasses with him, shared laughs, and entrusted him with his most precious world? The depth of the betrayal seemed endless, not just a careless mistake but a carefully crafted web of lies. Then there was his mother, Barbara. Her betrayal cut even deeper. She had been his anchor, his moral guide. Now, the realization of her complicity stained every fond memory he had of her guidance and love. Ryan sank deeper into his chair, his hands covering his face as the weight of the betrayal pressed down on him. This wasn't just a personal wound, it felt like his entire identity was unraveling thread by thread. How could he ever trust his own instincts again? How could he believe the memories he once held so close? The life he thought he had crafted with care wasn't his at all. It was someone else's design, and he had been blindly following a script written by deceitful hands. Hiring Brandon Glover hadn't come easy. Ryan took pride in his self-reliance, always believing he could solve his problems without dragging anyone else into the mess. But as he sat in the dim corner of a coffee shop a couple of towns over, watching Glover jot down meticulous notes on a sleek tablet, Ryan had to accept that this was beyond anything he could untangle on his own. Glover was the picture of quiet efficiency, sharp-eyed and well-known for his knack for uncovering hidden truths. "Don't leave anything out," Glover said, his voice calm and measured. Ryan laid everything bare, every detail, every overheard word. His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was impossible to miss. Glover listened without interruption, asking direct, thoughtful questions, and when Ryan finished, the investigator nodded and promised to get started right away. A few days later, Ryan held the first report in his hands. The envelope, sealed tight, bore Glover's signature precision. His fingers hovered over the edge, reluctant to tear it open. A cold knot twisted in his gut. Inside, the results of DNA tests awaited him. The clinical wording and precise percentages left no room for doubt. Liam, Lily, and Noah had no biological connection to him. Instead, their DNA matched Scott Kuhlman's perfectly. Ryan's eyes fixed on the paper for what felt like an eternity. His vision blurred, but the brutal truth burned itself into his mind. This wasn't just betrayal. It was complete erasure. Everything he thought he had passed down, the habits, the quirks, the little pieces of himself he had believed lived in his children, had come from someone else. The next blow came when Glover traced suspicious financial activity. He cross-referenced bank records and revealed how Scott and Vanessa had quietly siphoned money into offshore accounts for years. On the surface, each transaction looked harmless, labeled as vacation funds, medical expenses, or returns on Scott's investment strategies. But the amounts were staggering, far beyond what Ryan had thought their lifestyle required. At their second meeting, Glover laid out the evidence, sliding documents across the table one by one. "This account here," Glover said, tapping the spreadsheet with his pen, "is under Vanessa's name, but the trail leads straight to one of Scott's shell companies. They've been using your family's money to bankroll their little escapes, mostly at Barbara's beach house." Ryan stiffened at the mention of his mother's property. For years, he had viewed that house as a peaceful sanctuary, a place where Barbara hosted family gatherings and planned charity events. Now, it felt tarnished, another backdrop for their deception. "Here's the utility data," Glover added, sliding another paper forward. "Power usage spikes on weekends you were away for work, the same weekends Scott and Vanessa claimed they had their own obligations." Ryan's pulse hammered in his ears. How many times had he accepted Vanessa's hospital emergencies or Scott's last-minute trips without hesitation? Now, it was clear those excuses had been nothing more than smokescreens for their affair. The betrayal deepened with each detail, every new revelation carving away at the life Ryan thought he knew. But the harshest blow came through the emails. Glover's tech guy had combed through Barbara's archived messages, unearthing correspondence between her and Vanessa that stretched back over 10 years. Ryan's stomach twisted as he read them, a sick blend of rage and nausea washing over him. His mother, the one person he had believed would always be in his corner, had not only known but had carefully arranged the entire thing. In an email sent just weeks before Ryan's wedding, Barbara's words pierced him like a dagger. "Scott is the better match, dear. Ryan is stable, successful, and utterly devoted to you. With this arrangement, you can have it all, Ryan's security and Scott's passion. Trust me, it's for the best." Her tone was so casual, so nonchalant, as if she were coordinating dinner plans instead of orchestrating a betrayal that would dismantle her son's life piece by piece. One email after another revealed the depth of Barbara's involvement in keeping the affair under wraps. She hadn't just supported Vanessa, she actively helped cover her tracks. Barbara coordinated excuses for her absences, even volunteering to watch the kids during those secret weekend getaways. Ryan's hands trembled as he read through each message. Somehow, his mother's betrayal struck deeper than Vanessa's. She had knowingly chosen to protect someone else's happiness at the expense of his own, convinced she was acting in his best interest. With every new piece of evidence Glover uncovered, the tangled mess of lies became clearer. Patterns Ryan had overlooked for years now screamed for his attention: Vanessa's perfectly timed shifts at the hospital, Scott's frequent yet casual visits, Barbara's defensive tone whenever he asked questions that hit too close to home. The deception had stretched across years, looping around the people Ryan had trusted the most. The weight of it all pressed down on him, growing heavier with each revelation. But beneath the hurt and anger, something else began to stir, a quiet resolve. If Vanessa, Scott, and even his mother had spent years crafting this elaborate lie, Ryan would take it apart with the same level of precision. By the time he walked out of Glover's office that evening, Ryan wasn't just a man grappling with heartbreak. He was a man with a plan. Driving home, he could feel the weight of the evidence-packed briefcase beside him, as if it might explode at any moment. He knew he wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. The truth had shattered his life, but Ryan was determined it would also be the foundation for rebuilding it, this time, on his own terms. The storm was here, but Ryan was no longer standing helplessly in the rain. He was turning into something sharper. Something stronger. And for the ones who had betrayed him, he was about to become far more dangerous than they ever expected. Now, let's fast forward. Ryan sat across from Nicole Hughes in her sleek, minimalist office. Her reputation preceded her, a ruthless, no-nonsense attorney known for dismantling opponents piece by piece. The calm, heavy air in the room felt like a sharp contrast to the chaos Ryan carried inside. Sliding the thick folder across her desk, Ryan watched as Nicole flipped through pages of documents, reports, and the thorough evidence Glover had compiled. Her movements were steady, deliberate, her brow furrowing with every new revelation. Finally, Nicole leaned back, adjusting her glasses. "This isn't just a betrayal," she said, the weight of her words settling between them. "This was systematic, a full-scale attack on your trust and assets. If we play this right, they won't have a leg to stand on." Ryan nodded, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his calm exterior. "I'm not just after justice," he replied, his tone firm but controlled. "My kids. I need to make sure they're protected. No matter what." Nicole's lips curved slightly, an almost imperceptible smirk of approval. "Then we start with what matters most, your assets." First on the list was safeguarding Ryan's finances from any potential claims or manipulation. Nicole brought in Marco Goodrich, a seasoned financial advisor with a reputation for locking down complex assets. Ryan sat at the long conference table, watching as Marco outlined a strategy to shield everything he had built. "We're going to layer this," Marco explained, pulling up a detailed diagram on his tablet. "Trusts, offshore accounts, diversified investments under multiple names. Everything will be above board, but anyone trying to access these funds will hit walls at every turn." Ryan didn't hesitate. He signed off on every part of the plan, knowing this wasn't about greed, it was about ensuring that no one could take away what was rightfully his children's future. Marco moved quickly, drafting the paperwork for independent trust funds in the names of Liam, Lily, and Noah. The conditions were ironclad, airtight legal terms that prevented anyone, including Vanessa or Barbara, from accessing the funds. Only the children could use them, and even then, only for specific milestones, tuition, major life events, or medical emergencies. Ryan wasn't leaving anything to chance this time. "Their futures are secure," Marco assured Ryan, his tone steady. "Vanessa and Scott won't ever get their hands on these funds." Despite the preparations happening behind the scenes, Ryan kept up the facade of a normal, uneventful life at home. Every morning, he kissed Vanessa lightly on the cheek as she grabbed her hospital bag and headed out the door. Every evening, he sat with the kids, helping with math problems, sharing stories over dinner, and tucking them into bed with the same warmth he always had. It was all an act, a carefully constructed performance, buying him the time he needed. But beneath that calm exterior, his life was in constant motion. While Vanessa thought he was at the office, Ryan met with his legal and financial teams, quietly fortifying the walls around his assets and future. After each call with Nicole or Marco, he erased his phone logs and emails, leaving no digital trace for Vanessa to stumble upon. The hardest moments were those quiet dinners, sitting across from her as she casually shared stories about work, the same old routine she had perfected over the years. Ryan would watch her closely, hoping to catch some hint of guilt, some flicker in her eyes that betrayed the truth. But Vanessa played her part flawlessly, just as he did. The silence that hung between them during those nights felt almost like a challenge, two actors locked in a scene, neither willing to break character first. Meanwhile, Nicole's team worked around the clock, building a case so solid that not even Vanessa's best lies could poke holes in it. Surveillance photos, bank statements, email threads, and those damning DNA results were compiled into one unshakable dossier. Nicole was clear about the approach. Timing is key, she stressed during one of their late-night strategy meetings. We'll strike when they least expect it. This isn't just about the truth, it's about making sure we control how the truth comes out. Ryan respected that level of precision. Every move was deliberate, from when the divorce papers would be filed to the careful steps needed to protect the house and their shared assets. Ryan's company underwent a quiet restructuring. Shares were transferred into blind trusts, out of Vanessa's reach, ensuring she had no claim to what he had built. But no matter how much progress they made, the emotional weight of it all never quite eased. Late at night, Ryan often found himself alone in his office, staring at family photos lined up on his desk. Liam's grin, Lily's bright eyes, Noah's curiosity, those smiles reminded him why he couldn't fall apart. He loved them deeply, even if the blood tying them together wasn't his. In those quiet hours, Ryan made a promise to himself: this wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring they had a future untouched by the mess their mother had created. They deserved to grow up safe, free from the fallout of deceit and betrayal. They deserved better. As the days passed, Ryan grew more adept at balancing the line between deception and preparation. The trusts were locked in place. The evidence was ready. Nicole's plan stood fully developed, waiting for the right moment. But to the outside world, nothing seemed different in the Hood household. Vanessa kept up appearances. Scott remained the ever-present family friend. Barbara continued to stop by, her hands full of cookies and pies, flashing that same gentle smile, the one Ryan now saw as something far more calculated. Ryan greeted them all with calm, polite nods, masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. His world had already crumbled. Now, he was focused on rebuilding it, but this time, he wasn't the same trusting man he once was. The day was coming. The pieces were in place. And as Ryan sat through another quiet dinner, listening to Vanessa's soft laughter, he felt it: the moment of reckoning was just over the horizon. Evenings were the hardest. Sitting with his children, reading to them, or tucking them in brought comfort, but it also reminded him of what had been taken. Those small moments filled him with warmth and grief all at once. But no matter how much it hurt, Ryan stayed the course. The storm was his now, and he was ready to weather it. Ryan's love for them ran deep, Liam with his insatiable curiosity, Lily with her quiet elegance, and Noah with his endless excitement for learning. But even the sweetest moments carried a bitter edge, a reminder that, by blood, they weren't his. That thought gnawed at him, lurking just beneath the surface. Yet, somehow, it never dulled the warmth he felt whenever he was with them. One evening, as the sky outside turned shades of gold and purple, Ryan sat next to Noah at the kitchen table. The boy was hunched over his workbook, frustration clear in the furrow of his brow as he wrestled with fractions. His small fingers gripped the pencil tightly, knuckles pale with effort. "Here," Ryan said softly, easing the pencil from Noah's hand. He sketched a quick diagram of a pizza. "Let's say we cut the whole thing into 8 slices, and you eat 3. How many are left?" Noah's eyes brightened with sudden clarity. 5, he shouted, his face lighting up. Ryan chuckled, the pride swelling in his chest too familiar to ignore. "Exactly," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. See? You've got this. But as Noah turned back to his workbook, Ryan's smile faltered. The way his eyes crinkled with joy, it wasn't Ryan's reflection he saw there. It was Scott's. The realization draped over the moment like a dark cloud, making the joy feel fleeting, as if he were borrowing it, knowing it wasn't truly his to keep. Later that night, Ryan stood just outside Lily's room, leaning against the doorframe as the sound of her violin floated through the house. The piece she was practicing felt unfamiliar, soft yet heavy, the kind of melody that lingered long after the notes had faded. Lily's dedication had always been a source of pride for Ryan. She poured herself into every song, her passion palpable in each stroke of the bow. But as he listened, he couldn't help but wonder, was that love for music something she had inherited from Scott? Or was it something all her own? Ryan wanted to believe it didn't matter, that the late-night practices, the encouragement, and the countless recitals he had attended meant more than genetics. Still, the question lingered, stubborn and uninvited. He had been the one to raise her, guide her, and cheer her on. Shouldn't that be enough to call her his daughter? The answer remained just out of reach, leaving behind a dull, empty ache. Liam, his eldest, brought with him a similar blend of pride and sorrow. At 14, Liam was stepping into his own, growing into someone confident and sharp, qualities Ryan admired. One evening, Liam approached him after dinner, clutching a notepad filled with sketches and arrows crisscrossing the page. "Dad, check this out," he said, spreading the paper across the coffee table. "If we shift the midfielders here during defense, we can stop counterattacks before they even start." Ryan leaned in, tracing the lines with his finger. "This is smart," he said, nodding with approval. "You're thinking ahead, anticipating the play. Your coach is going to love this." Liam's face lit up with pride, his enthusiasm contagious. But as Ryan watched him, the way Liam's eyes crinkled with excitement struck a chord, and not the kind that brought comfort. That was Scott's expression staring back at him. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. For a brief moment, it was hard to even look at Liam without feeling the weight of that truth. Still, Ryan forced a smile, reaching over to pat Liam on the shoulder. "You're going to lead that team one day," he said, masking the tightness in his chest. In the quieter hours, long after the house had settled into stillness, Ryan often retreated to his office. The walls were lined with family photos, reminders of birthday parties, vacations, and the simple joys of ordinary days. He sat there, studying each picture carefully, as if searching for traces of himself in their faces. But no matter how long he looked, he always came up empty. Those photos, once symbols of a life he cherished, now felt more like artifacts from a world he no longer recognized. And yet, despite the pain, he couldn't pull away from his children. They were innocent in all of this, caught in the crossfire of choices that were never theirs to make. Ryan refused to let them suffer for the betrayal of others. He knew he couldn't let his grief twist the way he loved them. Instead, he poured his energy into securing their futures, determined to protect them no matter how the truth unraveled. The trust funds were more than just financial security, they were promises, symbols of his unwavering love and commitment. It was his way of ensuring they would have everything they needed to chase their dreams, long after the dust of deception had settled. In those moments, Ryan found a small measure of peace. No matter how much the betrayal had taken from him, it wouldn't take his love for Liam, Lily, and Noah. That, at least, would always be his to give. Even as Ryan poured his energy into safeguarding his children's futures, the emotional toll pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. Doubt crept in at the edges of his mind, gnawing at him in the quiet hours. He questioned everything, his place in their lives, the depth of his connection with them, and whether, someday, they might see him as little more than a stranger. The uncertainty threatened to swallow him whole. But even in the darkness, one thing remained steadfast, the love he felt for them, a love that refused to waver. One evening, as Ryan sifted through paperwork in his office, Noah wandered in. "Dad," the boy said softly, holding up a crinkled piece of paper. "I made this for you." Ryan took the drawing, his breath catching the moment he saw it. It was a simple sketch, their family, with their dog Max at their feet. And right at the center stood Ryan, drawn with oversized glasses and a broad, cartoonish grin. His throat tightened. "Thanks, buddy," he managed, pulling Noah close and hugging him tightly. In that moment, clarity washed over him. Real love wasn't bound by genetics. It lived in moments like this, late-night homework, violin recitals, and quiet afternoons spent chasing their dreams alongside them. The betrayal might have left scars, but it couldn't erase the years he had spent loving and raising them. The pain was undeniable, but so was his love. And in the end, that love anchored him, grounding him in a way nothing else could. This wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about holding tight to what mattered most, his children, their futures, and the life he had built with them, no matter how fractured it had become. Thanksgiving morning arrived wrapped in frost, the cold seeping through the windows as the sun rose over Milbrook. Inside the Hood household, the air was warm and inviting, filled with the comforting sense of roasting turkey and spiced pies. But beneath the surface, Ryan moved with careful precision, orchestrating every detail of the day with the same cold calculation he had used to build his case. The dining table gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, each silver fork and glass meticulously arranged. Yet, hidden beneath the napkins at each place setting lay something far heavier than utensils, envelopes, sealed and ready to crack the fragile facade they all lived behind. Ryan drifted through the house, greeting Vanessa with an easy smile as she flitted about the kitchen, adding the final touches to the meal. "Looks perfect," she said, stepping back to admire her work. Ryan nodded, his gaze lingering on her a little longer than necessary. She looked beautiful, confident, relaxed, and blissfully unaware of the storm building around her. The sight of her, so at ease, twisted something deep in his gut. Guests arrived shortly after noon, their laughter and cheerful greetings cutting through the tension Ryan felt brewing just beneath the surface. Scott and Jennifer were the first to appear, Scott's hand gripping an expensive bottle of wine as he stepped inside with that familiar, easy smile. Ryan accepted it with a polite nod, his grip firm as their hands met in a handshake that felt like an unspoken challenge. Barbara followed soon after, her usual poise masking the subtle air of control she wore like a second skin. As friends and family filled the room, the warmth of the gathering masked the quiet storm Ryan knew was about to break. Vanessa laughed easily at Scott's jokes, moving seamlessly between conversations, her charm lighting up the room as effortlessly as always. Barbara poured wine, lavishing attention on the children while keeping a watchful eye over the evening's flow. To everyone else, it was a picture-perfect Thanksgiving. But Ryan knew better. As the guests settled into their seats, Ryan stood at the head of the table, glass raised for the customary toast. His voice carried across the room, steady and sure. "Before we start," he said, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those he loved and those who had betrayed him, "I've prepared something for each of you. You'll find an envelope under your napkin. Please, take a moment to read." The shuffle of paper followed as the guests exchanged puzzled glances, lifting their napkins to find the sealed letters tucked neatly beneath. Ryan stayed standing, his eyes scanning the table as each envelope was opened. The weight of understanding dawned slowly, creeping across faces in waves of shock and confusion. Jennifer was the first to react, her sharp gasp shattering the silence. Her trembling hand released the photograph, letting it drift onto the table for everyone to see. "Scott," she whispered, her voice cracking. What is this?" Beside her, Scott's face drained of color as he unfolded the documents in his envelope, DNA tests, bank records, and surveillance photos, each damning in its clarity. His hand shook as he scanned through the pages, the truth written out in unforgiving detail. Ryan watched him, the weight in his chest lifting just slightly as Scott's carefully crafted world began to crack. There was no need for raised voices or accusations. The evidence spoke louder than anything Ryan could have said. As the tension settled over the table like a thick fog, Ryan remained at the head, unmoving. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustling of paper and the quiet unraveling of lies. One by one, the pieces were falling into place. And as Ryan's gaze met Vanessa's across the table, he saw the flicker of realization in her eyes. The reckoning had begun. Scott's grip on the envelope tightened until the paper crumpled beneath his fingers. His carefully constructed facade slipped, panic flashing across his face. He spun toward Ryan, his voice a strained mix of anger and desperation. "Ryan, what the hell is this supposed to mean?" Ryan's gaze didn't waver. His voice, calm and measured, sliced through the tension hanging over the room. "You already know what it means, Scott." His words felt colder than the November air outside. 15 years of lies. 15 years of betrayal and theft. And now, here we are. This is the reckoning you earned. Across the table, Vanessa's hands trembled as she clutched her envelope. Her knuckles were white, her complexion ghostly as her eyes darted frantically across the documents. The cracks in her composure spread like fault lines. "Ryan, please," she said, her voice fragile, on the verge of breaking. I can explain." "Explain." Ryan's voice sharpened, and for the first time, the simmering rage beneath his control seeped through. "You want to explain how you spent our entire marriage lying to me? Letting me believe I was raising my children while you played house with him?" His hand gestured toward Scott with a contempt that practically vibrated through the air. Vanessa's lips moved, but no sound followed. She had no defense. Barbara, seated beside her daughter-in-law, stiffened, her voice cutting in with the same air of authority she had carried Ryan's entire life. "Ryan, I only ever wanted to do what was best for you," she said, though even she couldn't hide the pleading edge in her tone. "You have to understand." Ryan's eyes locked onto hers. The thin thread holding his patience snapped. "Best for me?" His voice rose, disbelief lacing every syllable. He reached across the table and plucked the damning emails from Barbara's envelope, holding them up for everyone to see. "Was this for my benefit, Mother? Manipulating every corner of my life, forcing me into a marriage built on deception, all so you could mold my future the way you saw fit?" His voice cracked with bitterness. "You didn't want the best for me. You wanted control. And you didn't care who you hurt to keep it." Barbara's usually poised expression faltered, and for the first time, her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered, but even she didn't seem convinced by her words. "No," Ryan said flatly. "You were protecting your version of reality, not me." At the far end of the table, Jennifer rose slowly to her feet. Her hand trembled as she held the photographs from her envelope, her eyes scanning them as if searching for some alternative explanation that didn't exist. "All these years," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "You let me believe I wasn't enough. That the reason you grew distant, the reason you stayed late at the office, was because of me. And the entire time, you—" Her words cut off, and her furious gaze shot to Scott. "You were building a second family behind my back." "Jennifer, please," Scott pleaded, reaching for her. But Jennifer stepped back, her arm swinging before she could stop herself. The sharp crack of her palm meeting Scott's cheek echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Don't you dare try to justify this," she spat, the fire in her eyes leaving Scott stunned and silent. At the other end of the table, Liam's voice broke the heavy silence that followed. "Dad," he said softly, looking between Ryan and Vanessa with confusion painted across his young face. "What's happening?" Ryan's heart clenched. The fury that had driven him forward suddenly felt heavy in his chest, and as his eyes met his son's, the weight of it all nearly pulled him under. "I think it's time for you and your siblings to head upstairs," Ryan said gently, keeping his voice as even as he could. "This isn't something you need to hear." Lily hesitated, her violinist's hands brushing against the table as she lingered. Her auburn hair shimmered in the light as she met Ryan's gaze. "Dad," Lily's voice held a quiet question he wasn't ready to answer. "Please," he said softly. "Trust me." After a long pause, Lily nodded, gathering Noah and Liam as they retreated toward the staircase. Their footsteps faded, leaving only the harsh stillness of the dining room in their wake. The moment the children were gone, the storm that had been brewing finally broke. Vanessa leaned forward, tears streaming freely down her cheeks, pooling on the tablecloth. "Ryan, I was trapped. I didn't know how to stop it. I was scared to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." Ryan's bitter laugh cut through her words. "You didn't want to hurt me?" he repeated, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You hurt me every single day for 15 years. Do you understand that? Every kiss, every dinner, every time I tucked our kids into bed, it was all built on a lie." "I never thought it would go this far," Vanessa whispered. "But it did," Ryan replied, his tone colder than before. "And now, you'll have to live with that." Barbara's hand crept toward him as if to offer comfort, but Ryan stepped back before she could touch him. "I don't need your sympathy," he said, meeting her eyes with a gaze as hard as stone. "You were just as complicit. You betrayed me no less than they did." Scott finally found his voice, though his confidence had drained from him entirely. "Ryan, come on. We can fix this. You're making it bigger than it needs to be." Ryan's head snapped toward him, his fury barely restrained. "Fix this?" he growled, his voice thick with rage. "You don't fix 15 years of betrayal. You don't fix this." Jennifer's icy voice cut through the air like a blade. "No, you don't. Don't expect me to stand by you this time, Scott." Jennifer's voice was cold, her hands trembling as she gathered the scattered papers. "I'll make sure you lose everything, just like you took everything from me." Her words hung heavily in the air, the promise of inevitable destruction settling over the table like an approaching storm. Vanessa sat motionless, tears pooling beneath her trembling hands. Her gaze never left the documents in front of her, though her eyes seemed distant, as if looking through them to some far-off point she wished she could reach. Barbara, once the unwavering force in Ryan's life, looked small. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes dull. The iron grip she had always held over their family crumbled beneath the weight of the truth. Ryan's eyes swept across them, Vanessa, Scott, Barbara, even Jennifer, and for the first time in years, his mind felt clear. The strings that once tied him to this life had been severed, cut clean by betrayal and deceit. What remained wasn't anger or vengeance, it was resolve. "I'm leaving," Ryan said, his voice steady and free of hesitation. "I've made arrangements. The kids will be taken care of. As for the rest of you, you'll live with the choices you made." Vanessa broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but Ryan didn't falter. There was no fixing this. He turned away without another word, his footsteps echoing as he left the room and the life he thought he had built. Upstairs, he moved quietly from room to room, checking in on his children. Liam slept soundly, his arm draped over a book he had been reading. Noah snored softly, his arms wrapped around a worn-out stuffed bear. Lily's hair splayed across her pillow, her breathing light and peaceful. Ryan brushed a strand of hair from her face, lingering in the doorway for a long moment before retreating to his office. He sank into the familiar leather chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The family he had cherished was gone, fractured beyond repair. But under the grief, something else stirred, a quiet, determined strength. This wasn't an end. It was a beginning. And as the rain tapped against the window, Ryan allowed himself a brief moment of mourning before setting his sights firmly on the future. The days that followed Thanksgiving passed in a blur of careful, deliberate decisions. Ryan moved with precision, dismantling the remnants of his old life piece by piece. Milbrook held nothing for him anymore, the town now felt like a monument to betrayal. Leaving was the only path forward. The first step was selling the company he had poured years into. Through quiet negotiations and trusted intermediaries, Ryan orchestrated the sale behind closed doors. The deal came together faster than he anticipated, every detail meticulously handled to ensure the business and employees would be protected long after his departure. When the final papers were signed, a strange mix of emotions washed over him. He had built the company from nothing, now it was gone, but the price was worth the freedom. With his professional ties severed, Ryan turned his attention to the hardest task, saying goodbye to his children, even if they wouldn't hear the words directly. Late one night, with the house silent and dark, he sat at his desk and began writing. He started with Liam. "Dear Liam," he penned, the weight of each word pressing against his heart. Ryan wrote carefully, choosing each line with intent, filling the letter with the wisdom he had hoped to pass on in person. For Lily, his words spoke of her grace and artistic soul. For Noah, he poured his hopes for the boy's bright and curious future. By morning, the letters lay sealed in thick envelopes, entrusted to Nicole Hughes. She promised to deliver them when the time was right. The final step was cutting all remaining ties. Ryan sold the house, closed every account, and erased every last connection to Milbrook. His flight was booked under a new name, one that led him far from the ghosts of his past. As he boarded the plane to Singapore, Ryan looked back just once, the town shrinking beneath the horizon. Ahead, the future stretched out wide and unfamiliar, but for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of hope. In the gleaming, bustling streets of Singapore, Ryan had found his footing again. The city rose around him, a reflection of his own desire to rebuild, each tower of glass and steel a reminder that from nothing, something new could rise. He stepped into that new life with nothing but the lessons of his past and the quiet resolve to shape his future on his own terms. Ryan's first step toward rebuilding wasn't in boardrooms or at a desk, it was physical. He embraced a discipline his former self had long neglected. At dawn, while the city was still cloaked in shadows, he slipped into a secluded dojo tucked away in the quieter corners of Singapore. The master there spoke few words but demanded perfection in every movement. Each strike, block, and stance became more than exercise, it was a reflection of his journey. Every motion was deliberate, echoing the precision with which he now approached his life. The soft edges of his old self slowly melted away, replaced by lean muscle and hardened resolve. Sweat became a release, and the physical strain served as a reminder, he was reshaping not just his body, but his entire existence. By the end of that first year, the man staring back at him in the mirror was no longer someone burdened by betrayal. This was someone forged by it. Emotionally, Ryan found comfort in structure and solitude. Gone was the unpredictable hum of Milbrook, replaced by the steady rhythm of his new life, measured and precise. Therapy, though uncomfortable at first, forced him to peel back the layers of anger and grief he had buried deep. One night, after recounting the weight of his past, his therapist's words struck a chord. "Transformation isn't forgetting who you were, Ryan. It's choosing who you'll become." Those words stayed with him, surfacing in the quiet hours when sleep eluded him. Gradually, he let go, not of his love for Liam, Lily, and Noah, but of the bitterness that had tied him to the past. His love for them remained untarnished, but the betrayal that once held power over him began to loosen its grip. Professionally, Ryan had thrived. With the same relentless drive that once built his company in Milbrook, he founded Hood Innovations, blending his expertise in software with the rising technologies of blockchain and AI. The company's foundation was simple: integrity and transparency. Every product they launched bore the mark of a man who had learned the cost of deception. Under Ryan's leadership, Hood Innovations expanded rapidly, disrupting entire industries, from logistics to digital security. Tech conferences became his stage, and keynote speeches were his way of passing on the lessons he had learned through fire. "Success isn't avoiding failure," he said at one conference, addressing a captivated audience. "It's surviving it, and rebuilding with intent." But despite the accolades and sharp rise of his career, the nights felt hollow. The lights of Singapore flickered across the glass of his penthouse as he sipped green tea by the window, his thoughts drifting across the ocean to his children. Those letters, the ones he had left with Nicole, weren't just messages. They were promises. Promises that someday, when they were ready, they would know the truth, and maybe, just maybe, they would come find him. Years passed, and Ryan's name became synonymous with resilience. Yet beneath the recognition, a quiet ache remained. It wasn't regret for the life he had left behind, but a hope that somewhere down the line, the paths he and his children walked might cross once more. Ryan's transformation wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let it define him. Each step forward was part of that declaration, a farewell to what had been and a quiet promise of what could be. A decade later, Ryan Hood returned to Milbrook. There was no announcement, no public reveal, just quiet footsteps returning to familiar ground. The town had faded in his absence. Main Street, once the heartbeat of the community, felt worn. Boarded-up shops, cracked sidewalks, and faded signs whispered stories of struggle. But Ryan saw more than decay. He saw potential. Milbrook wasn't beyond saving. From the back seat of his Bentley, Ryan watched as familiar landmarks rolled by, the park where Liam once played soccer, the bookstore where Lily had spent afternoons, and the home that once held their laughter. It all felt smaller now, as if time had folded the edges inward. But Ryan hadn't come back the same man who had left. When he stepped out of the car at Milbrook Tech Park, the changes were undeniable. His tailored suit, sharp gaze, and calm composure spoke volumes. This was a man who had rebuilt himself, brick by brick. The Tech Park, one of his first acquisitions upon returning, was a ghost of its former self. Weeds climbed the fences, the building sat quiet, and the hum of innovation that once filled the space had long since died out. But Ryan saw through the dust and rust. Hood Innovations banners draped over construction fences, promising renewal. The grounds were already showing signs of revival, new infrastructure being laid, old facilities modernized. This wasn't just a business venture. It was personal. Milbrook was where his story began, and now, under his guidance, it would rise again. News of Ryan's return spread quickly through Milbrook, rippling through the town like a long-forgotten echo. Vanessa was the first to reach out. Her message had been brief, requesting a meeting at the small clinic she now ran on the edge of town. When Ryan stepped inside, the worn-out waiting room and faded walls stood in stark contrast to the pristine hospital halls she once commanded. Vanessa greeted him with a nervous, almost fragile energy. Her once polished appearance had softened, the weight of years and regret evident in the creases around her eyes. "Ryan," she began, her voice thin and unsteady, "thank you for coming." Ryan met her gaze with the calm, deliberate composure that had become second nature. "I'm here. Say what you need to say." She hesitated, hands twisting in her lap, her eyes flitting toward the floor. I just wanted to apologize," she stammered. "For everything. For the lies, for the hurt, for the choices that broke us." Ryan's expression didn't shift. "You can't fix it, Vanessa." The quiet finality in his tone made her flinch, but she pressed on. "I've tried to rebuild," she said, her voice cracking. "For the kids, for myself. I needed you to know that I regret it all, every day." Ryan's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Your regret belongs to you. I've let go of the anger, but my focus has always been the children. And they seem to have grown into good people, despite it all." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but Ryan's resolve didn't waver. This wasn't about reopening old wounds, for him, it was closure. A quiet, necessary end to a chapter he no longer needed to revisit. Barbara arrived a week later, unannounced. She stood in the doorway of his office at the Tech Park, a mere shadow of the woman she had once been. Her usual commanding presence had eroded over the years, leaving behind a fragile frame and eyes dimmed by regret. Ryan could have turned her away. Instead, he gestured toward the chair across from his desk, leaning back as she settled in. Ryanander, she began softly, her voice trembling under the weight of unspoken guilt, I've come to ask for forgiveness. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. For what exactly, mother? For manipulating my marriage? For deciding you knew what was best, regardless of the damage? Barbara lowered her gaze, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. I thought I was protecting you, she said. I believed I was guiding you toward the life you deserved. Ryan's jaw tightened. No, he replied calmly, though the edge in his voice was unmistakable. You believed in control. You let your version of my future matter more than my own choices. Barbara's shoulders sagged, and the tears she had tried to contain slipped free. I lost everything, Ryan. I'm alone now, the community, the respect of the kids, even you. Ryan studied her, the weight of her words settling between them. You can't undo the past, he said after a long pause. But I've made sure you'll have what you need. Financially, you'll never struggle. That's all I can offer. Her lip quivered as she rose from the chair, her eyes silently pleading for more. But Ryan offered no further words. As she walked away, he felt no anger, only the quiet acceptance that some bridges simply couldn't be rebuilt. The most meaningful reunion came unexpectedly. A few days later, Liam, Lily, and Noah appeared at the tech park, their presence filling the office with the warmth Ryan had long craved. Now grown, they carried themselves with quiet confidence, shaped by the challenges life had thrown their way. Liam, now 24, had joined Hood Innovations months earlier, climbing the ranks through dedication and hard work. Lily, 22, carried herself with poise, a talented artist whose spirit mirrored the grace she had possessed since childhood. And Noah, 19, already stood out as a rising star in tech, pursuing blockchain projects that mirrored Ryan's own ventures. Dad, Liam began, his voice laced with emotion, we've missed you. Ryan's heart tightened, though his exterior remained composed. I've missed you too, he replied, his voice softer than he intended. I've followed your lives from afar, but seeing you now is different. Lily stepped forward, her eyes searching his face for answers. Why did you stay away so long? She asked quietly. Why not tell us sooner? Ryan hesitated, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. I wanted you to have a childhood free from the burden of what happened between your mother and me, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. I thought if I stayed away, you could grow into who you were meant to be, without my mistakes hanging over you. Noah, ever the pragmatic one, nodded thoughtfully. And now? Why come back? Ryan smiled faintly. Because it was time, he said simply. Time to reconnect, and rebuild. The conversation flowed naturally after that, laughter breaking through the years of distance. For the first time in years, Ryan felt grounded, not in the past, but in the future they could shape together. Under Ryan's leadership, the tech park became the heart of Milbrook's revival. State-of-the-art facilities drew new businesses, while partnerships with local entrepreneurs breathed life back into the struggling community. Main Street, once dotted with shuttered shops, slowly filled with bustling cafes, boutiques, and innovative startups. Ryan went further, establishing scholarships for local students, ensuring that Milbrook's next generation wouldn't face the same barriers he had. It wasn't just about rebuilding a town. It was about rebuilding trust, restoring hope, and proving that even in the wake of betrayal, something beautiful could rise. The town's gratitude toward Ryan was unmistakable, but for him, the work was never about recognition. This wasn't about seeking redemption or rewriting the past, it was about forging a new path, one unburdened by the weight of what had been. Ryan had no interest in reclaiming his old life. He was far more focused on building something new, something lasting. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows over the tech park, Ryan stood alone on the rooftop garden. The soft hum of the town settling for the night drifted up to meet him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Before long, his children joined him, their silhouettes outlined against the warm glow of Milbrook's lights. Lily leaned on the railing beside him, gazing at the town below. "You've done something incredible here," she said softly, admiration lacing her voice. Ryan smiled faintly, his eyes lingering on the horizon. "We've done this together," he replied, his tone warm but resolute. "And this is only the beginning." The difference between the man Ryan had once been and the man standing there now was striking. Pain had been reshaped into purpose. Betrayal had given birth to resilience. And loss, once his greatest burden, had become the foundation of his legacy. Milbrook, the town that had once symbolized his downfall, now stood as a monument to his perseverance, a reminder that even shattered lives could be rebuilt stronger than before. Vanessa's world had shrunk to a fraction of what it once was. The elegant dinner parties and high society functions were long gone, replaced by the sterile walls of the small clinic where she now worked. Once the proud face of Milbrook General, Vanessa now spent her days treating minor ailments and drowning in endless paperwork. The peeling paint, outdated posters, and flickering fluorescent lights reminded her daily of just how far she had fallen. Her patients came and went, polite but indifferent, oblivious to the life she once led or the influence she once wielded. But it wasn't the clinic that weighed on Vanessa the most. It was the look in her children's eyes, the quiet disappointment that lingered in every polite exchange. They visited her occasionally, but not out of affection. Duty brought them, not love. Lily's conversations, though gracious, carried a subtle but unmissable tone of disapproval. Liam's words were practical, efficient, limited to the bare essentials. And Noah rarely lingered, his visits brief and distant. Vanessa carried the full weight of her guilt, unable to escape the knowledge that Ryan, the man she had betrayed so profoundly, had become the guiding force in their lives. Where she had stumbled, Ryan had thrived. He had built something extraordinary from the ashes she left behind, creating a legacy she had nearly destroyed. Her clinic work felt like penance, but deep down she knew the truth: some wounds could never fully heal. Scott, once the charming and ambitious financial advisor with a smile that could disarm anyone, now led a life stripped of all glamour. He spent his days in a cramped cubicle at Hood Innovations, quietly performing the duties of a mid-level accountant. The irony was not lost on him. The company he now served had been built by the very man he had betrayed. The office space was cold, impersonal, a daily reminder of the heights from which he had fallen. Each morning, Scott punched in, keeping his head down, hoping to avoid the sideways glances from younger colleagues who whispered behind his back. They knew the stories. His personal life had unraveled just as spectacularly. Jennifer had left him swiftly and decisively, taking everything but his worn suitcase and the clothes he packed in haste. Their divorce was quick and merciless, leaving him with little more than distant memories of the life they once shared. Attempts to reconnect with his children were met with hollow indifference. He often dined alone in his modest apartment, the silence pressing in around him like a physical weight. Barbara fared little better. Her once grand estate had been sold, replaced by a modest retirement home on the outskirts of town. The lavish gatherings and influence she had once commanded were distant memories now. Her room, small and unadorned, held only a few faded family photos and a handful of trinkets that hinted at her former life. The staff treated her with polite detachment, unaware of who she had once been. To them, she was just another tenant, no different from the others. Estranged from her grandchildren, Barbara spent her days alone, haunted by the choices that had led her here. The letters from Liam, Lily, and Noah came sporadically. They were brief, polite, and devoid of warmth, more obligation than affection. Ryan ensured she was cared for financially, but any semblance of a relationship between them had long since dissolved. Barbara had built walls around Ryan's life for years, but in the end, it was her own fortress that crumbled. In stark contrast, Liam, Lily, and Noah thrived. Under Ryan's guidance and the stability provided by the trust funds he had secured, they flourished. Liam rose steadily through the ranks at Hood Innovations, carving his own path through merit and determination. Lily's art gained recognition, her confidence evident in the way she carried herself, bold and unshaken by the past. And Noah, brilliant and driven, was already making waves in the tech industry, mirroring the tenacity his father had shown years before. Where their biological parents had faltered, Ryan had stepped in, providing not only financial security but the stability and mentorship they needed. Their lives were proof that even amidst betrayal and loss, hope could prevail, and that sometimes, the most unexpected hands could guide a family forward. Ryan lingered near the edge of the courtyard, observing the animated group as they scribbled ideas across a whiteboard set up under the shade of a tree. Their passion was unmistakable, the same kind of drive he had once carried in the early days of building Hood Innovations. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. This was the future he had envisioned, not just for his company, but for Milbrook as a whole. As he stood there, Liam approached from the opposite direction, his eyes bright with excitement. "Dad," Liam called out, holding a tablet under his arm. "I've got the latest projections for the expansion. You're going to want to see this." Ryan turned, his smile widening at the sight of his son. "Lead the way," he replied, falling into step beside him. Inside the sleek glass facade of Hood Innovations, Liam guided Ryan into one of the executive conference rooms. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the table. Liam's confidence radiated as he laid out the expansion plans, new partnerships, research facilities, and sustainability initiatives that would position the company at the forefront of the tech industry for years to come. Ryan listened carefully, pride swelling as Liam explained each detail with the precision of a seasoned leader. "You've done well," Ryan said once Liam had finished, his gaze steady. "I see a lot of potential here, and I see a lot of you in this plan." Liam's smile softened. "I learned from the best." Their bond had grown into something far more profound than Ryan had ever anticipated. It wasn't just the dynamic of a father and son, it was the relationship of equals, driven by mutual respect and shared ambition. Later that evening, Ryan found himself on the rooftop garden, the city stretching far below him as the sun dipped toward the horizon. A gentle breeze rustled the greenery, carrying the faint hum of life from the streets below. It wasn't long before Lily joined him, her hair tied back, paint smudges faint on her fingertips, a subtle reminder of her latest project. She settled beside him, tucking her legs beneath her. "You know," she said, tilting her head as she looked over the town, "I used to think we'd never come back here." Ryan glanced at her, curious. "There was so much pain in this place," she continued, her voice soft. "But now, it feels different. You changed that." He shook his head lightly. "We changed it." Lily smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said after a pause, "about expanding the art therapy program to rural communities. There's a lot of trauma out there that doesn't get the attention it deserves." Ryan's gaze softened. "I think that's a brilliant idea." Her face lit up at his encouragement, and Ryan marveled at how much she had grown, not just in talent but in heart. Noah joined them moments later, his laptop tucked under his arm as usual. He set it aside, stretching his legs out and letting out a breath. "Mom called today," Noah said casually, though his tone hinted at lingering unease. Ryan didn't respond immediately. He let the weight of the statement hang between them, knowing Noah had more to say. "She's trying," Noah added after a beat. "But, it's different now." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's all right. You can acknowledge the past without letting it define you." Noah considered that for a moment, then nodded. Their relationship with Vanessa had settled into a quiet distance, cordial but measured. She had made her peace with the choices she'd made, and so had they. Besides, Ryan added with a small smile, "You've all done just fine without me meddling too much." Noah laughed. "That's not exactly true. You meddle, just in a way that works." The three of them shared a quiet laugh, and for a while, the rooftop garden felt like home. The next day, Ryan met with town officials to discuss a new community project, a tech incubator designed to give young entrepreneurs the resources to start their own businesses. The initiative wasn't just about driving economic growth. It was about providing opportunities that Ryan wished he had in his youth, ensuring the next generation had the tools to build something of their own. By the afternoon, Ryan found himself strolling through Main Street, passing by new cafes and art galleries that lined the revitalized downtown area. At one corner, he paused to watch children chasing each other near the park, the same park where Liam and Lily had once played as kids. He didn't feel regret anymore when he looked back on those memories. Instead, he felt gratitude. The town had transformed, much like Ryan himself. His name wasn't just tied to scandal or loss, it was attached to hope, growth, and a future shaped by perseverance. As he continued walking, a group of high school students waved from across the street, recognizing him immediately. "Mr. Hood," one of them called out. "We're submitting our startup pitch next week at the incubator." Ryan smiled warmly and gave them a nod. "I'll be there," he replied. And he meant it. For Ryan, the work was never finished, but he wouldn't have it any other way. As Noah stepped down from the stage, Ryan felt the moment etch itself into his memory, not as a culmination, but as a continuation of the life they had rebuilt together. Lily leaned in slightly, nudging Ryan with her elbow. "He's beaming," she said with a soft laugh. "You know that's because of you." Ryan shook his head gently, his gaze fixed on Noah as he returned to his seat. "He earned that smile on his own," Ryan replied. "I just gave him space to grow." Liam, seated on Ryan's other side, grinned. "Still, Dad, you did a little more than that." Ryan's heart warmed at the sentiment, but he let it pass without argument. The pride he felt for his children was something he rarely put into words, but in these moments, it was reflected in the way they looked at him. As the ceremony continued, Ryan allowed his thoughts to drift. He had spent years rebuilding himself, laying down the framework for a new legacy. Yet, as he watched Noah clutch his diploma, he realized something profound. The real legacy wasn't Hood Innovations or the tech park that now pulsed with new life in Milbrook. It was this. The resilience his children carried, the strength they had discovered by watching him rise from the ashes, that was the legacy that mattered most. The realization settled in his chest like a quiet truth he had always known but hadn't fully acknowledged until now. When the ceremony ended, families spilled out into the courtyard, the air buzzing with excitement and laughter. Ryan waited patiently, standing near the edge of the crowd as Liam and Lily greeted old classmates and friends. Before long, Noah appeared, diploma in hand and a broad smile stretched across his face. "Congratulations," Ryan said, gripping Noah's shoulder firmly. "I'm proud of you." Noah held his father's gaze for a beat, his expression softening. "Thanks, Dad," he replied, his voice carrying more weight than the simple words let on. Lily soon joined them, wrapping her arms around her brother in an affectionate hug. Liam followed, shaking Noah's hand with pride. As they stood together, Ryan took a step back, allowing the moment to unfold in front of him. This was his family. Not perfect, not born from simplicity, but forged through hardship, love, and the quiet understanding that they had all chosen to stand by each other. Vanessa lingered on the edge of the crowd, watching from afar. Ryan caught sight of her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. She offered a small nod, not a plea for reconciliation, but a quiet acknowledgement of the lives they had now built separately. Ryan returned the nod, the gesture closing the final thread of their shared past. Later that evening, the family gathered at Ryan's home for a private celebration. The house, modern yet warm, overlooked the hills just outside Milbrook, a place Ryan had chosen for its tranquility. Laughter filled the dining room as they shared stories, old memories blending seamlessly with new ones. At one point, Lily raised her glass. "To Noah," she said with a grin. For proving that the youngest sibling can actually outshine the rest of us. Noah chuckled, raising his glass in return. I had good teachers. Ryan felt his chest tighten with gratitude as he looked around the table, at Liam, Lily, and Noah. Years ago, he had feared losing them. But now, as they laughed and shared this meal together, he realized that nothing had been lost. If anything, they had gained something far greater, a bond built on trust, resilience, and the unwavering choice to remain a family. As the night wound down, Ryan stepped out onto the balcony, the stars stretching endlessly overhead. Liam joined him, leaning against the railing. You know, Liam said quietly, I used to wonder if you'd ever come back to Milbrook. Ryan glanced at him. And now? Liam smiled. Now I know you were always here, even when you weren't. Ryan's gaze shifted to the lights of Milbrook in the distance, the once quiet town now bustling with new life. I never left, Ryan replied softly. I was just waiting for the right moment to return. And as the stars shimmered above, Ryan knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the last sliver of sunlight disappeared beyond the hills, Ryan lingered in that moment, standing side by side with his children, his heart fuller than it had been in years. The warmth of their laughter drifted on the cool evening breeze, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet that followed wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. Liam broke the silence, his hands tucked into his pockets as he glanced toward the distant glow of the tech park. You know, he said with a small smile, I used to think the goal was to outrun the past, to build something new and forget everything behind us. Ryan looked at his son thoughtfully. And now? Liam met his father's gaze, his expression soft but sure. Now I think it's more about learning how to carry it with you, but in a way that doesn't weigh you down. Ryan's eyes flickered with pride as he gave a slow nod. That's a lesson I wish I'd learned sooner, he admitted. Lily leaned into her father's side, her arm looping gently through his. But you did learn it, she said, her voice gentle but firm. And so did we. That's what matters. Ryan pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her words settle deep within him. Noah, ever the pragmatic one, glanced down at his diploma, tracing the embossed letters with his thumb. So, what's next for us? He asked, the question hanging in the air like the first note of a new song. Ryan looked out over the town below, the lights of Milbrook shimmering like stars scattered across the landscape. The question felt different now. For years, what's next had felt like a demand, a heavy weight pressing down on him, forcing him to prove something, to rebuild what had been broken. But now, as he stood surrounded by the people he loved most, the question felt lighter. It wasn't a burden, it was an invitation. Ryan smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the glow of the town he had helped transform. Whatever we want, he answered simply. The future stretched out before them, undefined but full of possibility. And for Ryan, that was enough. As they began walking back toward the car, Noah nudged Liam playfully, sparking a new round of laughter. Lily followed, shaking her head at their antics, while Ryan trailed behind, watching them with quiet affection. These were the moments he cherished most, the simple, unremarkable ones that reminded him why he had fought so hard to rebuild his life. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, no longer held power over him. It was just a story, one that had shaped him but didn't define him. Ryan Hood's true legacy wasn't something tangible, it wasn't found in tech parks or balance sheets. It was here, in the footsteps of his children, in the bonds they had forged, and in the laughter that echoed into the night. As the car pulled away, Ryan glanced back at the horizon, the last threads of daylight fading into stars. The road ahead felt open, and for the first time in years, he welcomed it, whatever it might bring. He had already won.